We welcome the great Tim Watts of BamaOnline, and lots of questions for Tim as Alabama goes through the first training camp under Kalen DeBoer. Because, Tim, 2007 was a long time ago. I guess 2006 would have been the last time a non-Nick Saban coach held a preseason camp, and that would have been the great Mike Shula. This is so different.
Yeah, it takes a minute to get used to it. I mean, you knew it would be different. I mean, you had a coach that had been doing it forever, completely old school guy, doing all those little things you expect a guy from that era to do. And then you come in with a coach that's 20 something years younger, 20 years younger, a younger mentality. The kids are actually younger, social media, they're smarter, they're making money. So you knew it would be different. And it is. It's completely different than what you saw with Nick Saban from the practice music. I mean, that was one thing, to the accessibility to people, the coaches. We're not used to seeing assistant coaches. I mean, we went a decade without hearing from anyone but Kirby Smart and the offensive coordinator, it's felt like. So now you got everyone talking. You get to see them all and you get to see their personalities. And to be honest, I think it's a good thing. I think these guys sell their program. I think it's a recruiting tool. Jamarcus Shepard's been fantastic. Mo Linquist, all those guys, getting to see their personality, I think helps the Alabama fans know what they're dealing with.
So I think my biggest question is with the offense, and obviously this is a different situation than Kalen DeBoer even had at Washington last year, because he's got a different coordinator. Nick Sheridan's the coordinator now. He was the tight ends coach at Washington last year, but different quarterback in Jalen Milroe, a different skill set than Michael Penix, obviously. But coming into the year that Jalen Milroe is the guy. And I was thinking about this the other day, Tim. Last year, a quarter of the season went by before Alabama said, Jalen Milroe's our guy. And I would say that it was even longer before Tommy Rees, who was the OC at the time, decided, I'm going to call plays that suit Jalen Milroe's skill sets. You're talking about like a third of the season going by before that happened. Is this going to look like a little bit more built for Jalen Milroe offense off the bat?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's your quarterback one. I haven't heard anything else about that. I mean, you bring up a great point. It's like the Tyler Buckner start at South Florida didn't happen. Nobody talks about it. I mean, nobody discussed it. I mean, Jalen Milroe didn't even play in that game. So to work from there to where he is now, I think this coaching staff has confidence in Milroe. A lot of the reports we get back are he is confident, he's relaxed, he's learning. And hey, you watch the offense that these guys run. I mean, anybody that watches the breakdown of Kalen DeBoer and what they do, there's a lot of options, long, deep, short, check downs, all that stuff to help him have a chance to be successful. And also, he's got another year under his belt. I mean, Jalen Milroe is battle tested at this stage, having played in the biggest stages. I mean, he played Georgia on a neutral field. He played at Auburn. He played Michigan in the national championship game. So there's some confidence that goes from being in those games and getting that experience.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. And we talked to Joe Cook from Inside Texas the other day. We were talking about Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack in their new spots. Who steps in as the guys that Jalen Milroe is going to be throwing to?
I like Jeremy Bernard. I don't think he got enough attention. I mean, he played behind three guys, one first, second, and third round picks at Washington. Stood out in the spring game. Obviously, he's the first guy I think you look at, along with some of the experienced guys like Kobe Prentice. And you absolutely have to talk about Ryan Williams, right? I mean, this is a guy that's still supposed to be playing high school football. They had a practice play escape the field the other day, one great one-handed catch, and we know everything that guy's built. Some guys are just built different, whether they're 16 or 26. Some of them are just built different. I think Ryan's one of those. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field. And as good as I think the wide receiver core can be with Jalen, I also think a big benefit for Kalen DeBoer, Nick Sheridan in Alabama that they didn't necessarily have at Washington is the running game. I mean, you got Jamarian Miller over here hearing great things about him. You got Justice Haynes. You got Richard. You got a lot of guys talented in that backfield, and you have a superior interior offensive line when you add Parker Brailsford coming back with Booker and and He-Man out there. You got a all SEC type middle offensive line to work behind.
Yeah, and then the Caden Proctor thing, I think the most interesting part of the Caden Proctor story, and it got kind of overshadowed by him going to Iowa and coming back, was how much he improved last season over the course of the year. I mean, you look at that SEC championship game, he was awesome in that game. You look at the Arkansas game in the middle of the season, you're like, oh man, this guy's a freshman. But the Caden Proctor we're going to see this year, I'm guessing he's going to be very similar to that guy we saw in the SEC championship game.
I think he'll get there eventually. I'm curious. This guy hasn't played since last year, the season. So he missed spring. He didn't go through spring. So he's still going through some growing pains, I would expect. Playing with a different body. He's lighter than he was before. But like you said, talent is talent. There's still 3 weeks to the season. He's getting those reps. And don't forget, he's getting reps against a really good defensive line. They're not like a bunch of big name guys like you've seen at Georgia, but the minute Kane Womack got to Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, one of the first groups they were talking about, perhaps one they've talked about the most, is the defensive line. So the offensive linemen are getting tested. The left tackle, the right tackle, all of them are getting that work they need to get.
Well, and that D-line is not something we've talked about a lot. We've talked about what's happened and what's changed in the secondary with Caleb Downs leaving, obviously Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry getting drafted. But I thought when I was there in the spring that the D-line looked very deep, especially up the middle. Like we talked about Tim Keenan, Jaheim Otis, Tim Smith, and Jaheim Otis wasn't even practicing at the time, but you knew he was coming back. They've got a bunch of guys who played. It feels like that's a group that they can feel pretty confident in.
There's a lot of experience. There's a lot of growth. These guys are moving on up in their age. I mean, they've got, again, Overton's a guy we don't even really talk about that much yet, but heard he had a great spring game this weekend. So there's guys that have depth. You got guys with experience. You got talented guys like James Smith who's sitting back there waiting for his turn. So the one thing about that group I think that you have to like is they're pushing each other because there's not a guaranteed lock. There's, like you said, when you get depth, that goes to that whole iron sharpens iron situation. And I think Alabama's got that. Now, again, it's not a bunch of guys that are mentioned in the top 10 picks in the draft, but I think everybody's pretty excited about that group as a whole. And I think they've got a chance to be a difference maker.
Now, let's talk about the secondary because it is going to look very different. This is a case where they needed to go out and get Keon Sabb from Michigan. They got Damani Jackson from USC, and they lost some really good players. But I also remember when I was visiting in the spring, seeing Kane Womack, and he's talking about the freshmen they brought in. I wouldn't be shocked if we see some freshman corners playing too.
No, I think that's going to be on the table. I mean, you lose 3 first-round draft picks. I think you project Caleb Downs there in the future. Terrion Arnold, unbelievable football player. Kool-Aid had been a staple for a couple of years. So you're using a lot of experience and talent, but you're bringing in a very talented group of guys. We hear a lot about Xavier Brown's not your normal freshman. He makes a lot of plays. Heard him matched up with Ryan Williams several times this year. You also bring in Zay Mincy, who might have the biggest upside of all the cornerbacks when all's said and done. He probably had a little bit longer learning curve than Xavier did, but I think he's just as talented. So you bring those guys in because, the safeties I think you feel okay with. I mean, you got Malachi came back. You got Keon Saad. He's a good football player, but, out on the corners, you got right now Damani Jackson. And, the big thing for Damani for me is this is a money year for him. It's almost like that free agent year. I mean, this is a chance, didn't probably get as much out of his first 2 years as he wanted, but now he's getting that chance. He's going to be that chance to be that boundary corner and, have an impact.
Yeah. And that's the thing. They look like maybe they're not as uber talented back there as they were last year. Cause you lose Caleb Downs. That is a big, big loss, but I'm not that worried about their defense. I don't see the issues there.
Well, you know what makes a secondary go from good to great is a good pass rush. So
Yes.
if you get those guys off the edge, they look a whole lot better. If you get guys coming off that edge, collapsing that pocket in the middle, which is going to be the plan. I mean, we know that Kane Womack is going to be extremely aggressive. That defense, he's got linebackers with a lot of experience. He's got edge guys, a ton of talent to try to put pressure on there. That'll certainly help a young secondary because defending for 3 seconds is a heck of a lot better than trying to run with the guy for 5 seconds.
Exactly. All right. So I'm going to ask you the same thing I've asked all the other folks we've talked to. And because I think this is a fun thought starter preseason. So I'm looking at Alabama's schedule right now. When you look at this schedule, what's the game where your BamaOnline subscribers are like, this is definitely a win. We got this, that you look at it and go, wait a second, this is not a gimme here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm always kind of the eternal pessimist when it comes to things. One game I'm kind of looking at is the Missouri game. I'm glad. I think it's good that that game's at home because you sandwich in, going to Tennessee, Missouri's at home, and then you go to LSU. There's a lot that can happen there. Missouri's going to have some talented guys. They're a scrappy bunch. I don't think Missouri's being talked enough about overall. I still think Alabama's obviously in a good position to win that game, but it's a game I think you have to circle and watch. And also, Oklahoma is one I personally watch. Now, the fans, they seem to be worried the most about Wisconsin. Maybe that's the great unknown. I don't know as much about Wisconsin as I do the other teams, but very interesting schedule because there's a lot of teams you don't really associate with the Bama schedule. You go down this, I mean, South Florida's coming back. There's another game that you didn't really think a whole lot about, but you got Oklahoma. You're not used to seeing them. Georgia's a regular season game, so it's quite the schedule. I think it's a great schedule for Alabama, especially from a recruiting standpoint, where they're going to have a lot of big games at home to have visitors there.
Yeah, and this is a hard schedule. Like,
Yeah,
it's because we talk about Florida and we talk about Oklahoma as getting the kind of really rough schedules in the SEC. Mississippi State did too, but I don't think of the playoff contenders, Alabama's is up there. Now Georgia's got the 3 really hard games on the road, but Alabama, like at Oklahoma,
yeah.
Missouri at home, they're kind of, I think they're lucky they got South Carolina at home. Like you don't want to go to South Carolina as Alabama because that's one they circle. It's their, highlight of their season situation. This is a rough schedule.
Yeah, I think it's a 2-loss schedule. You're still in the playoffs when all's said and done. I mean, I think if you skate through here, I mean, there's some good teams on there. Now, a lot of this will change. There'll be teams we think that are good that aren't very good. But I think the teams we're looking like, I don't know a whole lot about Oklahoma. I don't know what to expect with them. I know what Georgia is. I know what Tennessee is, LSU, those schools. But there's some uncertainty with this schedule. This could be the toughest schedule in the nations when all's said and done, or it could look a little less depending on how teams like Oklahoma do. It's a big year for them. Wisconsin, teams like that, that could change how we perceive this overall.
I do feel like they get the kind of it warms up nicely heading into Georgia because you got Western Kentucky's TJ Finley, old friend TJ Finley, who played at LSU and Auburn and then Texas State. And then there's USF, who challenged them last year, and Byron Brown's one of the better quarterbacks in the group of 5. And then, a trip to Wisconsin where you don't really know what the Badgers are going to be in year 2 under Luke Fickell.
Yeah, I think the one thing you don't know what a lot of the schedule is, but a lot of people don't know what this Alabama team is yet. I mean, this is a skill set, very good team. Obviously went to the college football playoffs. They're competitive every year. And now you've got kind of a creator calling the plays. It's going to be a little bit more aggressive, a lot more motion. Again, an experienced Jalen Milroe, a very good middle of the offensive line. There's still questions on this team, but I think you're most excited if you're an Alabama's fan to see what Kalen DeBoer can do with this kind of talent. And you're most curious to see what happens on defense. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to figure out the swarm and how that's going to work and the aggression. But I do think they're going to like it because, the one thing that bothered, I think, as great as Bama defenses were, the biggest complaint I always heard was them sitting back on 3rd and 14, 3rd and 13, and giving up big plays. That always bothered the fans the most. I don't think we're going to see that as much as we did in the past.
Well, that always is a double-edged sword because it can swing back the other. Why are they blitzing on 3rd and 14? How come they just don't take it easy and keep it all in front of them?
Yeah, that's the best play called after the play is over. That's when to tell us what we should have done. Should have did this.
But what we all learned, Tim? This is a lesson I think every single person who watches college football learned last year. When you're defending 4th and goal from the 31, rush more than 2.
Yeah, that's still, I don't think I've ever seen that play or the kick 6 where I understood how it happened. I don't understand how either happened. That's why I love sports, though. I don't know how it could have it never should have happened. And it happened. And in that scenario with those two teams is just the Bama Auburn absurdity in some of these plays is what makes it legendary.
So let me explain how I watched 4th and goal from the 31 last year, Tim. So I covered Michigan, Ohio State last year, and I get done, film what I need to film, write my story. So because that was a noon Eastern game, and obviously the Iron Bowl was a 2:30 Central game, and so I'm in the PF Chang's in Ann Arbor because the traffic is so bad that you cannot get back to the interstate. So I'm like, well, I got to go find somewhere to sit so I can watch the end of the second window games. And they had the Apple Cup on the TV, the one TV in the PF Chang's, because that's the only place you could get into. So I have the Iron Bowl on my iPad, and it's me and these two Michigan fans that are sitting next to me at the bar watching the Iron Bowl on my iPad. Nobody else in the room is seeing any of this. And we just jump out of our seats on the 4th and goal from the 31. We're like, he caught that? And the rest of PF Chang's turns and stares at us.
I had people texting me that I hadn't talked to in years. They weren't even in my phone. It was unbelievable. It's like I threw it or caught it. They were just like asking me questions. I had no idea how to answer it. I mean, the way it happened, and to me, it was the ease of it. To me, it was him sitting back there watching the route, getting open in the end zone, shedding, catching, touchdown. That was I mean, this wasn't some Hail Mary tip pass and a bunch of mistakes. It was actually a 4th and 31 play. But again, your point's valid. You don't want to leave a quarterback sitting back there forever throwing darts, which is what Jalen did. One of the best passes of his life.
Unbelievable. All right, let's talk about this season, this schedule. We talked about the sneaky one. I want to talk to you about something I talked to Jake Rowe about on yesterday's show, because we were talking about Georgia's schedule and the 3 monster road games where they go to Bama, they go to Texas, they go to Ole Miss. And he said for the Georgia people in the building and the fan base, it's still the Alabama game. It's going to Tuscaloosa. Alabama is their boogeyman, because as good as they've been, they still have not been able to beat Alabama consistently. That's, they beat them in that national championship game, but they lose to them in the SEC championship game last year. Like, that's still the game for them. I'm curious from your perspective, is Alabama still the game for most of the teams on its schedule, or has Georgia or Texas taken that spot?
I mean, Georgia and Texas get and deserve a lot of respect. I mean, top 5 programs, big name coaches, a lot of talent, everything they've got going on. But I don't know of anybody. I judge this. I know this. Teams that don't even play Alabama celebrate Alabama's almost losses. So when Bama almost lost, they're all over social media celebrating they almost lost. So I still think Alabama's the biggest game for most people. Now, I think it could depend. I mean, for Oklahoma, it might be Texas or something along those lines. But I don't think you want to necessarily. I don't think you're just saying, hey, babe, they're playing Alabama this week. I don't think we'll go by any means. I mean, Georgia gets and deserves all the respect they should. Texas is the same way. But when Alabama, again, no matter what happens in the Alabama game, everybody has an opinion. And I mean, from the left coast to the right coast, north to south, they all have an opinion. You can see it on social media, on any of the On3 message boards. It's people talking about how lucky Bama was or how Bama gets away with penalties. So Bama's still a big deal.
I don't know if you heard, but Bama never gets called for holding.
They know. It's amazing. I mean, the year Tennessee beat them, I was talking with friends of mine, and they had 19, 20 penalties, and they acted like, well, they didn't get the good penalty. So I've never understood. I mean, I do know Alabama fans would disagree. All they talk about is all the penalties.
So going back to Neyland for the first time since that game, I think that's going to be a fun one too. And this again kind of underscores how difficult this schedule is, because that Missouri game is right up against that Tennessee game. You got the Georgia game before that, a few weeks before that. It's not going to be easy, but especially going back to Neyland, where that place was electric, and this should be a much better Tennessee team than the one that came to Tuscaloosa last year.
Yeah, it should be. I don't know if they can be a better, more talent, a smarter offense. The team that beat Alabama literally found the 2 or 3 plays that worked and just ran them into the ground. Offense was, Bama couldn't stop them. I mean, Tennessee did all the right things, pressed all the right buttons, had the breaks they needed fall their way in that game. Still one of the craziest games I've ever seen, from all the way through the ending to the wild fumbles, the turnovers, the penalties and stuff. I think Tennessee's always going to be a tough place to play. They're going to have Nico, an exciting quarterback. He's going to bring a different dimension than the other quarterbacks we've seen in the past. But there's an uncertainty there. How good is their defense going to be? We know what Josh Heupel's going to do on offense. We know how good Nico has the potential to be, and they've been waiting to see it. But that crowd, I don't think you can sleep on that crowd. I'd say that for several SEC games, LSU, Alabama, Auburn. That's all those teams are great and tough to play on the road.
The funniest part about this, the craziest part about this, you just brought up LSU for the first time.
Yeah.
Like Alabama plays in Baton Rouge this year.
Mm-hmm.
You just brought up LSU because that's where they're at with the Georgia coming, with them having to go to Tennessee, with Missouri being good again. That Alabama LSU game could be just as important as any of these other ones.
Well, you put that three. That's a lot of these
in there.
Yeah, a lot of these games. When I was looking through the SEC schedule, a lot of them have these 2 or 3 games in a row. Auburn has a tough 3-game stretch on the road.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama, if you look at that, I mean, there's at Tennessee, very emotional game. Come back, Missouri at home, who is going to be a competitive football team. And then you go back to LSU. Now, you got a lot of young guys Alabama's did very well in Baton Rouge, but you got a lot of young guys who will be excited. It might not mean as much. But I tell you the one thing, when you're going to Oklahoma, when you're going to Norman, Baton Rouge, and LSU, the one thing you really want is an experienced quarterback. And again, that goes back to Jalen having a lot of experience. I mean, hey, playing Georgia in the SEC championship game in Atlanta, that's a road game. That's a loud crowd, heavily Georgia favored. Just did a great job there, was very poised in that game, and, big part of them finishing it off. So he's got that experience, but you definitely don't want to be flying in there with a freshman quarterback or a guy that hadn't been in that situation. So that's one benefit to Alabama. Plus, again, the experienced offensive lineman in the middle.
Look at that. Tim is a pro, bringing it full circle. That's where we started. Jalen Milroe taking snaps from Parker Brailsford.
Yeah.
Offense built around him. Look different than anything we've seen. Cannot wait. Tim, thank you so much.
Hey, man, anything for you. I appreciate you and love watching the shows. You do a great job, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.